Today, we're going to talk about human organ systems and how they interact. And the goal of this video is to explain how the circulatory system works with the respiratory and digestive systems to supply the body with oxygen and nutrients. So, in this image, you see that there are several organ systems in the body. In this video, we're going to focus on just three and how they interact. So, first, we're going to talk about how the respiratory and cardiovascular systems interact to supply oxygen and remove carbon dioxide from the body. Then we're going to talk about how the digestive system and the cardiovascular systems interact to supply nutrients to the body. Okay, so first, let's talk about the relationship between the circulatory system and the respiratory system. In the circulatory system, there are some major components. There's the heart, blood vessels, and the blood. Now, they're within the category of blood vessels. There are three types here. So there are veins, arteries, and capillaries. Then there are some major components of the respiratory system. You have the airways, the lungs, and the diaphragm. The airways are made up of the pharynx, larynx, and trachea. The lungs are made up of the bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli. And I mentioned a moment ago, you have the diaphragm now. So I highlighted in yellow the capillaries and the alveoli for a reason. So the capillaries are part of the circulatory system. The alveoli are part of the respiratory system. These two parts of these systems, these two components of these systems are going to have an interaction that we're going to see here in just a moment. So where do these two systems interact? The respiratory system and the circulatory system. Where do they interact? Well, the respiratory and circulatory or cardiovascular system come together at each alveolus. Now, an alveolus is a single microscopic sac on the lungs. So in this image, here's the heart. And you can see that the heart has connections with the lungs. So you have a lung over here and a lung over here. If you take just a small piece of the lungs and you zoom in on them, look at them under a microscope, you would see these sacs like you see on the right here. So I have an arrow showing you're zooming in, and you would see these sacs. So each little ball is an alveolus, and on the surface of each alveolus, you have capillaries. So the alveolus, well, each alveolus is a part of the lung, but these capillaries on the surface of each alveolus is part of the circulatory system that's connected up with the heart. So this is a place where these two systems meet. Okay, now that you know where they meet, let's talk about what's happening in this interaction between the two. So when you inhale, when you breathe in, oxygen enters your lungs and it travels to the alveoli, those sacs that I mentioned a moment ago. So that's why you see this red arrow coming in. And right here, O2, that's referring to oxygen. So when you inhale, the oxygen comes into the alveolus. Then the oxygen diffuses from the alveolus into red blood cells. And these red blood cells that you see here at the bottom, these are in your blood, which is flowing through your capillaries. That oxygen, when it diffuses from the alveolus into the red blood cell, I can't speak. It replenishes your blood with oxygen. Now, that tells you how oxygen gets into your blood by going through your respiratory system. But there's another part that you need to know about, another type of interaction here, and that's referring to this other gas, carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide diffuses across the thin walls of the capillary and into the alveolus. So this pink portion here, that's the thin wall of the capillary. Here's the thin wall of the alveolus. Carbon dioxide diffuses through those cells into the alveolus, and then carbon dioxide is going to be exhaled from your lungs. So that's why this blue arrow is going out, because when you breathe out, when you exhale, carbon dioxide leaves your body. So the big idea here is you've got these two gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, and the oxygen is going from the alveolus into the blood in the capillary, but carbon dioxide is doing the opposite. Carbon dioxide is going from the blood in the capillary into the alveolus. That's the interaction. Okay, now let's talk about the relationship between the circulatory system and the digestive system. So first, to understand the relationship, you got to know some of the components. I already talked about the components of the circulatory system, so I just listed those again here on the left. But the digestive system has some important components. You've got things like the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the liver and gallbladder, the pancreas, the small intestine, and the large intestine. Now, which components interact between those two systems? So in this picture, you see the small intestine, and this is going to the small intestine is going to play a really important role in this interaction. So the digestive and circulatory system, or cardiovascular system, they come together at these things called villi. Now, what is a villi? A villi is this finger-like projection that lines the inside of the small intestines. So look at this picture of the small intestine. If we were to zoom in or look at a small piece of it under a microscope, the inner lining of the small intestine under a microscope would look like this. And I said it's a finger-like projection, so hopefully you can kind of see this kind of looks like a finger. This looks like a little finger. So each one of those is called a villi or a villus. Each one's called a villus, and plural is villi. Within the villi are capillaries. So we looked at some capillaries a moment ago in our other example. So capillaries are inside the villi, and the villi is where this interaction is going to be taking place, this interaction between the circulatory system and the digestive system. Yes, villi have capillaries inside them. Okay, so how exactly does this interaction work? So I've got in this image, here's a villi, and inside this red and blue portion, that's where the capillary's at. So how does the interaction work? Well, when you consume some food, the food gets digested in the stomach. And that food that's been digested, it travels to your small intestine. Well, there's nutrients in that food. For example, you've got glucose. That's a sugar. That glucose is what your cells need to create ATP to have energy to function. So there's nutrients in your food, and that nutrients gets transported through the thin surface layer of the villi. So that's this striped line here. It says thin surface layer. So the glucose, or the nutrients, it doesn't just have to be glucose, it can be other things too, but the nutrients are going to be transported through that thin layer of the villi and into the blood that's in the capillaries. And then that nutrient-rich blood is going to be taken to the liver. So the liver is also one of the components of the digestive system. So that nutrient-rich blood is taken to the liver, and it gets processed in the liver. And then that blood is delivered to the rest of the tissues in your body through veins. So the nutrients in your food has to go through the digestive system first, and it's in the small intestine, specifically through the villi, that the nutrients are transported into your circulatory system. The nutrients enter those capillaries inside the villi, and then once the nutrients are in the circulatory system, they can be transported throughout the rest of the body through veins, and those nutrients can be taken to all the other tissues in your body. So that's the interaction between the circulatory system and the digestive system.